This is a 3-hour program, and I am not going to play guitar for 3 hours. I got to tell you this. Sorry. 3-hour sets are against union regulation. So welcome to this class. I hope you enjoy it tremendously. And it's going to be lecture and discussion for the first hour or so, and then we'll take a break, and then we'll come back and we'll do a lot more exploration of these topics in interaction with each other that should really get it where, as opposed to just hearing it, you actually feel the whole thing, and I hope you enjoy it tremendously. And since it is experiential, definitely, as well as didactic, I'd like us to start with a little meditation. We are massage therapists. We are experts in relaxing, so prove it to yourself. Just assume a nice position here. And close your eyes if you're comfortable with that. Again, just settling into yourself. As we run around in these conferences, oftentimes we maybe lack a little moment of pause, and oftentimes it's the pause when learning goes in. And we all know when you're more relaxed, learning has a much wider avenue for its coming into you. So breathing, enjoying yourself. Just feel your body from head to toe. Feel the breath moving through your body from head to toe. Enjoy that feeling of being alive. Feel grounded. Feel yourself all the way up to the crown of your head. And just take a moment just to relax, feeling complete in yourself and connected to heaven and earth. Breath in, let it out with like a ha. Take one more breath in, let it out with a sound like a ah. I like the James idea actually. Find where the tone resonates with your heart the most. Take another breath in and just find that tone that seems to come to that center of your heart. So I just want to start by doing something I always forget to do. I'm going to give myself a commercial. Because I always forget. I have a book here. I have a few copies I brought with me, the Deep Massage book. I have some of my CDs of music for guitar, for meditation and massage. I teach classes. I run a school in Austin, Texas. End of commercial. Thank you very much. Okay. So, we're going to talk about the science and soul of teaching, and I'd like to invite, one reason why you're close is really invite you to say stuff, and I think that we're close enough together that we won't necessarily need to pass a mic, but I will ask you if you're going to ask anything or say anything that you project, and that's going to be part of what we're going to learn, the soul of teaching. Could you imagine Tina Turner singing softly? No. So we all have to bring out our inner Tina Turner today as we shout, "I have a great idea," or some variant of the above. So I found this cute little thing here. It says, newspaper reports assigned to cover the International Conference on General Semantics at NYU had a great deal of sport with the program announcement of a panel of speakers on nonverbal communication. This is typical of Western society. So, as I said in my opening talk, Aldous Huxley, the man who wrote Brave New World and Doors of Perception, a brilliant, brilliant man, whose brother was the great Julian Huxley, the evolutionary biologist. Aldous Huxley helped influence the founding of the Esalen Institute. We all know about Esalen in Big Sur, California, where modern American massage blossomed. And he spoke of it as a place where you could study nonverbal humanities. Just like to ask you, what do you think nonverbal humanities means? This isn't a rhetorical question. I don't have the answer. I just have my answers. What do you think it means? How does it relate to what you do?
I'll start off with saying body awareness, body language.
Great. Great. And like we say, so many people are psychophysically illiterate, they don't see their body as having any linguistic power. Right.
Touch is communication.
Touch is communication. And what other subjects do you think could be covered under the topic nonverbal humanities? So where might touch, what are the brothers and sisters of touch as nonverbal humanities? Music and art, yeah. Anything else you can think of?
Dance.
Dance, great. All of the movement and movement education traditions. All right. So we can see this is a richness, this is really, in many respects, the richness of our field that it grows out of is that of the nonverbal humanities. And we do need to keep that in mind as we emphasize the science more and more. The choice of this title of this talk was very consciously the science and soul of teaching. To me, the soul is a bit more associated with the nonverbal humanities. The science, of course, is connected with the research, evidence-based, and so on. And whenever I see people arguing one way or the other, I feel like it's like somebody arguing which eye you ought to see out of. That right one. The right one is the right one. What about the left? No. Well, isn't that silly? We need to have binocular focus when we're looking at reality. So, let's take a look at another perspective. There's Aldous. I want to give credit. Handsome young man, huh? Martin Buber. Buber was a Jewish philosopher, brilliant, brilliant guy, most famous for writing the book I and Thou. And he also wrote quite a bit on education and influenced education in Israel. He has a book called Between Man and Man. And in that, by the way, if I mention any book, it's going to be in the bibliography, and I'm going to put this PowerPoint in the Hoover and so on. But I tend to like to work till the last minute, because sometimes I have a good idea even the morning of the presentation. So almost all the books I mentioned will be in the bibliography you'll be able to have access to. So Buber has an essay called The Education of Character, which has influenced me tremendously. The idea is, he says, education that is truly worth its name is education of character. And we notice that an undercurrent in many of the educational forums is, okay, we've got all these methodologies and what all, but how can we get these students to actually do their homework? How can we get them to actually participate functionally in class and pay attention during business, of all things, and then want to practice business? So the question is the integrity of the person. How do we affect the character of this person? By the time most people get out of massage school, they have a different level of integrity. They have a different level and a different way of inhabiting their whole selves than they had before they started school. And so Buber says, It is not the educational intention that is fruitful, but it is the meeting which is educationally fruitful. That means the meeting of me to you. And in his language, the meeting of I and thou. Buber says, if you just have an I-it relationship, then that's not ideal for human relationships. Now, sometimes I'm working on somebody, and I'm up against a recalcitrant hamstring. Has that ever happened to you? And suddenly I'm going, goddamn hamstring. You know, I've forgotten the person's name. I've forgotten where I am. It's just me and a hamstring. You know? Please. And then suddenly I wake up. I go, you've totally lost your relationship to this person. It's turned into an I-it relationship, which can easily happen when you're lost in the neuromuscular wilderness. And then I restore it. I go, oh, it's I, thou. This is a person. I need to be relating to the person. And as a student, similarly, I need to be relating to them more than simply the depository of knowledge, not the kind of chip-based notion of, wow, if I just had a chip, I'd implant it in your brain and you could go home. And I would charge about $10,000 for that chip. But no. Thank God, no. So, Buber also said, oh, wait a minute. Didn't I have another one of his? Oh, I thought I did. I think it may be coming up. Okay. Sylvia Ashton Warner, somebody that's kind of interesting. I've heard her name, but I never was quite aware of how. And then in the course of researching for this talk, I Googled books on teaching, and the first thing that came up was Sylvia Ashton Warner, a book called Teacher. She taught in New Zealand for 24 years. She taught the Maori children. And very, very passionate book. If you ever get a chance to read it, I'm in the middle of it right now. So, what a dangerous activity teaching is. All this plastering on of foreign stuff. Why plaster on at all when there's so much inside already, so much locked in? If only I could get it out and use it as working material, and not draw it out either. If I had a light enough touch, which I think is interesting to use that imagery. If I had a light enough touch, it would just come out under its own volcanic power. Have you ever seen where you just touch that student, there's one word, and you see the lights go on? It's kind of like an elevator. You know, when I was a kid, you had to push in the button. And now all you have to do is just place the heat of your finger right next to the button and it lights up. I still like to push it in just to make sure. But I'm learning how to touch lightly enough and touch with light so that the person's own desire to learn, we're natural learners. This is a human nature. Our own natural desire to learn comes rushing forth. She also says, I am touched again with the fever of it all over again and am swept up in its drama, the drama in the bloodstream when people are real. The teacher has to be real in front of the student. The teacher has to meet the student person to person, not with an educational objective and some kind of wire connecting them to the educational objectives. Person to person. Soul to soul. And there's Sylvia herself, obviously transported by her own inner volcanoes. There's been a lot of emphasis lately, and I think that we need to cast a little bit of a critical eye, or at least adding the left eye to the right eye here, or right brain to the left brain. Been a lot of emphasis on the STEM curriculum, saying that science, technology, engineering, math should be what education is pretty much devoted to, at least on a college level. Obama's come out about that, and many other people have. I can appreciate it. The assumption is you can make more money if you study one or more of these subjects. I believe that's true. I'm not sure that the sole purpose of work is to make money. I know for me, I've been making love more than money for most of my life. You know, Groucho Marx said, when money flies in the window, love flies innuendo. Consider that. So, teaching only to the left brain is I think it's a tragedy, although you've got to include that, of course. What about the educated heart? Many of you may remember that Nina McIntosh book, Educated Heart on Boundaries. What about explicitly teaching creativity? Picasso said every child is a genius, and we succeed in educating them out of that. What about psychological, biopsychosocial issues of being? What about the energetics? We, the Nonverbal Humanities, are a bulwark against this tragedy of emphasizing one side. If science is not linked with ethics, if science is not linked with ecological wisdom, we could, as we're all aware, we could destroy the environment for human beings, leaving it to the beetles, which have a remarkable longevity. But meanwhile, we'll be wearing gas masks. I can get a little apocalyptic sometimes. But you know, there's a danger there. There really is. We're seeing it with global warming already. I know that as I veer toward these topics, sometimes they can seem a little political. They are a little political. And I take certain positions, not strongly, and not to the exclusion of realizing other people may have other feelings and convictions, which I honor as well. But let's add to the STEM curriculum art, environmental studies. Don't you think that that's necessary? History, literature, philosophy, psychology, and touch education. Again, how many times are you teaching something and you flash, you go, wow, the whole world needs to know this. That is the depth of what we have to offer in terms of our knowledge. So we use touch as our primary teaching medium because it's a language of and to the deepest part of the person. I said it in my opening, but I want to remind you and own it for all of ourselves, that touch is the first sense to develop in the embryo. Touch, remember, the ectoderm develops from the same, the skin develops from the same embryonic layer as does the nervous system. That's the ectoderm. So skin is considered, as Ashley Montague said, skin may be considered the most exposed portion of the nervous system, or alternatively, the nervous system can be considered the most buried part of the skin. Okay. That gives us evolutionary leverage. That gives us perhaps the deepest language with which we communicate with the human nervous system because of this foundational role of touch for our entire sensory world. And I think that students are attracted to massage because intuitively they feel the power of touch. Usually explicitly, they've had some experience which has changed their lives through touch, or even just through the idea of touch, because they make a change in their lives to decide to come to massage school. It's great, isn't it? Thank God they still make that decision. Okay. We'll talk about why they may. Some of you have heard this, and if not, I just want to relate it from Jacques Luceron, who was a French philosopher, resistance fighter during World War II, and who was blind from the age, I think, 6, as a result of a childhood accident, hitting his head against a desk somewhere. And he wrote a book called And There Was Light. If you don't have that, this is a beautiful, beautiful book, his autobiography. Touching the tomatoes in the garden and really touching them. Oh, I'll accompany this one. I don't have a melody for this. Touching the tomatoes in the garden and really touching them. Touching the walls of the house, the materials of the curtains, or a clod of earth is surely seeing them. It is turning in on them and allowing the current they hold to connect with what's own. Like electricity. To put it differently, this means an end to living in front of things and a beginning of living with them. Never mind if the words sound shocking, for this is love. You cannot keep your hands from loving what they have really felt. truly one of the greatest short passages on touch. And the way in which touch sees, in some respects, even more deeply than the eyes, certainly precedes the visual sense. There's Mr. Luceron. So let me ask you first, comments, questions, builds on this so far, and feedback. Is this making sense? Yes. And what occurs to you? You all have a lot of experience, and so you got your own light bulbs. You're deep in thought, deep feeling. I suppose you're deeply in agreement as well with what we've talked about so far. So let me continue. Yes?
As I hear these things, and I you know, the destiny that you spoke of, the opening, it strikes me that this is for us as educators to take with us. It isn't necessarily content, or is it content to share with the student?
I think, personally, periodically, I like to find a way to share it, and I'm careful about my dosages, you know, because if you do it too much, then it just turns into New Age pablum, you know, which we don't want. If you do it too little, they lose the big picture. So I think virtually everything I've talked about so far is something that I end up sharing with the students in one way or another. I think so. What do you all think, and how do you do it? I mean, I'm sure these ideas don't, you know, they overlap with many of your own. Yeah?
Well, I tell the students the old adage of the 3 men and the elephant.
Oh, yeah?
You know, one feels one thing. And I say, with every person you touch, it's going to be a different part of the elephant that you feel, depending on the person. And I think that's what we're conveying here in a way.
Right. I remember I've been doing zero balancing for a long time along with other therapies, and there was just one day, isn't it ridiculous after 10 years suddenly you learn something really simple, you know. I'm working and I'm feeling this rib and I went, I've never felt a rib like that before. And ever since then, now I've never felt any rib like any other rib before. Like, oh my God. You know, if you're awake, it's all new. So, yeah. So the elephant's got many parts. You know, I just want to remind me, have you ever seen an elephant skeleton? It is so cool. In the middle of their forehead, just where the third eye should be, there is a big hole. I saw that in a museum. I went, what is that? And well, of course, when you think about it, their trunk goes up to here, and all of the nerves from the trunk go into their cranium here. So they have a big hole that's bigger than their eye hole, right up here in the middle of their forehead. You go, well, that must mean something. It's very cool at the least. Yeah?
I think one way to share this with your students, you know, you were saying how do you share it back with your students, is that if you put one of these up every week on the board or whatever, then they start to come in and going, okay, what did they got up on the board today? And then you talk maybe 5 minutes about what they felt once they read it.
Yeah.
And how did it relate to them or relate to what they're learning. Some of them may never get that it relates to them until they have that light bulb moment later on in their career. Or if you do that in the first class, they still don't get it. But if you do it in their second or third or fifth class, it might really make a light bulb moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's part of the education of characters. You want to find a way, sometime or other, somehow or other, to get to that core where suddenly there's a little evolutionary step that's taken inside that person. And that's the education of character. Yeah?
I just want to say in response to this whole having to share with the students, I'm very personal with my students, always. And I drive 30 miles to get to school, and I often start my day, and I set it up like this, that, you know, I say to them, you know, I drive 30 miles to get here, and I'm thinking about you the whole time. What I want to say to you, this and that. And so here's my thought for the morning.
Uh-huh.
And I also tell them I have a BA in philosophy. And I was going to be a philosophy professor, but decided against it. So I said, so you're getting the benefit of that. And I think one of my successes as a teacher is that I am very personal with my students.
Right.
And I tell them stories, the stories of my life
Yeah.
that have been the most significant things. So, you know, I feel like part of me as a teacher is myself. Not like, I'm the subject matter.
Yeah. Yep. And it's analogous to our massage. We're working to help people become restored as human beings, not simply to facilitate their human doing. It's the same thing as a teacher. If I'm just a human doing as a teacher, then I'm accomplishing my educational objectives and I'm meeting all my core competencies, thank God, and so on and so forth, but I'm not actually meeting the student. Buber's point is not just the philosophical. It is the meeting which is fruitful. It is not the educational intention that is educationally fruitful. You have to meet them first, and your intention is secondary. Thank you. So, see how much we know? Cool. So you could also say, well, I've been driving for 30 minutes thinking about you. Have you been driving 30 minutes thinking about me? Not that they should, really. Yes, teacher.
I will ask them.
Yeah. You've been thinking, yeah.
I will tell you.
Yeah.
Someone asked me why I was coming to this class.
Yeah.
And I said, well, because I took a class at his school in Austin.
At our school?
I love the feeling of your school.
Ah, thank you.
This is before I met you.
Ah.
And so now it really resonates.
Thank you very much. For all of us, this is our lifelong love and work, and you know, that anybody should do anything less than a great job with education, it just strikes me as being, why would you do that? Why wouldn't you try to be as great as you could be? So, thank you very much. All right. Now, I'm going to set the stage for talking about science by just dissing science one more time. Just this year I found this quote from Ludwig Wittgenstein, the philosopher, Kate. Even if all possible scientific questions be answered, the problems of life still have been not touched at all. Which is kind of wild, because science deals in explanations, you know, rather than in living, per se. It's similar to news. You know, sometimes I get so angry. Something happens, like somebody gives a speech, and immediately the commentators saying, well, this is what he said, and this is what the left wing thinks about this, and this is what the right wing thinks about it. I'm like, couldn't you just do away with the narratives and let the experience have some moment of resonance? Couldn't you cover, well, of course we all know this, couldn't you cover the tragedy without sensationalism and allow some moments for feeling? I mean, couldn't we allow grief instead of immediately looking for who to blame this on, whatever the natural or political circumstance could be? So it's kind of a theme that we are substituting sometimes explanations for direct experience of life. You know what I mean? So there's Mr. Wittgenstein. Okay. There he is. I know Wittgenstein, after philosophy classes, used to take his students to the movies with a big bottle of wine. And he would get drunk in front of the screen, and he would say to them, "It's like a shower." You know, they've shown that there's a reason why you sometimes get your best ideas in a shower. The neurophysiology of this has been shown, that you need to focus on the subject with your frontal lobe, but then you need to relax and let it go into your temporal lobe, and then you have enhanced the possibility of aha to happen. It was an article, I think, called The Eureka Effect in the New Yorker a number of years ago. And they say that's why, because the shower distracts you enough that you just go into that more creative place in which the conscious and the unconscious minds can have a dialogue, which is where your creation is largely coming from. But let's take a look at the science, because it is super important. And what we can know is that the information enters the brain through the senses and goes directly to the thalamus, in the diencephalon. And the thalamus is a sensory relay station, like the executive secretary. She decides whether you get to talk with a boss. I'm sorry, the cerebrum is too busy to talk with you right now. You're just not important enough, you little tickle sensation, or whatever it may be. Okay. So, if the thalamus reads what's going on as being too quick or threatening, then it goes directly to the amygdala. The amygdala is only one neuron away from the hypothalamus. So it's got a very direct route, because if the sympathetic nervous system needs to be triggered, it needs to be done as fast, as quick, and as completely as possible. You may recall that the sympathetic nervous system is not something which goes to one place or another. The sympathetic system goes to all the places where it goes and simultaneously stimulates them all, so that you get a whole body response, whole organ response to whatever the stress might be. Amygdala, you may recall, is a cute name. It means almond, because it's shaped like an almond. I just like the etymologies of things. Question or comment?
A little bit of both. So next weekend I'm going to be teaching a seminar in Lafayette, Louisiana. For the AMTA chapter down there. But just the other night there was a mass shooting in a movie theater in Lafayette. I'm so sorry. And so last night I found myself really struggling with how to be sensitive to that, and to be able to teach a class, because I know there's going to be a lot of feelings. There's people from all over the state, but I mean, I think a lot of people are going to be feeling the levels of it, and I really found myself kind of at an impasse of how I wanted to address it. Our girls had some friends over, and they were begging to go down to this park at 11 o'clock at night. I said, okay, fine, I'll drive you down there, and your girls take your pictures or whatever you're going to do. And so I'm walking around barefoot in the grass, and I just kind of had this insight. And now I feel very comfortable that I know how I'm going to address it. But the whole time I was thinking about it is that this old primitive brain, this fight or flight thing. I mean, that's some of the stuff I'm going to be talking about in terms of like pain perception.
Yes.
And how that it can increase or decrease pain perception. And so for the same reason that I would want to decrease that sense of threat or danger to reduce somebody's pain, and I want to do the same thing for my entire class to reduce to make it easier for them to absorb information.
Beautiful. And you're right. I mean, it's another languaging for that is that in that kind of context, you're in kind of a heightened energy field. We could say a sympatheticized field almost. And in a heightened energy field, what you say can go in more deeply, both negatively and positively. So it gives it a heightened opportunity when those sort of things have happened. I know I happened to be teaching the first day of a craniosacral class in 2001 when the buildings got destroyed, and it was an incredible experience. So you've got a especially wonderful opportunity, sadly enough, to deal with this. I did a webinar called The Alchemy of Dentistry, not an alchemy, a seminar to my dentist's office. It was called The Alchemy of Dentistry, and I was talking about how when people are in pain, if you do something that is kindly and healing, it goes into a really deep place because they're already vibrating. On the other hand, if you don't treat them well and you cause more pain, we end up with people who end up having phobias about dentistry. Of course, very few people go to the dentist with, again, for fun. But some can be more healing than others, for sure. Now, I also prefer nitrous oxide, I got to tell you, if necessary. But Yeah, really good point, and congratulations and good luck in your seminar. Yeah, Dale.
Just a point of reference to the gentleman here. I went into, right after Andrew in 1992.
Talk up a little bit, Dale.
Said I went to into Miami to teach after Andrew in 1992, and one of the things that was very helpful to me was everybody was shell-shocked. The whole class suddenly took on the meaning of what do you do when you had an environmental disaster in houses basically being shattered around you. How do you reduce that sympathetic overcharge? It becomes the topic. The element of what the initial speaker was talking about in terms of grounding might be one way to help allow for that overcharge to find its grounding, as well as that being how do we, in touch therapy, facilitate that as well.
Cool. Thank you. I think one other person had a hand up.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was, I'm kind of in the middle here. Go like this. I was.
I think if anybody really wants to use the mic, they can, but I think we're small enough that we don't necessarily have to.
I was teaching in Moncton, New Brunswick, when there was a shooting and 3 RCMP officers were killed. So my assistant and I were already in the hotel. There were about 10 of the 30 course participants already checked in. The town was in a lockdown. We couldn't leave the hotel. We had like 3 hours before the course started, so we gathered in the room and we all meditated and we were all hoping and sending out energy, and we ended up being about 14 in the class, but it was quite a challenging situation for my assistant and I to kind of hold the space to keep it open for the learning and not kind of ignore what happened. It was, I think that we had some sort of success, but it was really challenging, and it seems to be happening more and more.
That's true.
Learn how, whatever tools to help keep our space grounded and open for learning and touch and caring.
Great. Yeah, I mean, and as we'll see, this really enters into, simply good psychophysiology in any case. So, as we said, if the information is perceived as too quick or too threatening, process quickly, goes to the amygdala, way before you can think about it. The hypothalamus will activate the sympathetic response throughout the entire body-mind. On the other hand, if it's perceived as non-threatening, or particularly if it's perceived as pleasant, the information is processed more slowly, goes to the hippocampus. Anybody remember where hippocampus, what's the etymology of it? It's so cute. Seahorse. Because it looks like a little seahorse. Goes to the hippocampus, the center of memory, and to the cortex to think about that information. Obviously, as teachers, if we can have that information going to the hippocampus versus the amygdala, we're in a much better situation for learning to take place. So we need to create an environment that is as unthreatening, really, as humanly possible. And the things which can create the feeling of not being safe would be on a physical level of bullying, perhaps sitting too long. I promise I'll get you up after a few more minutes. Intellectual negativity, feelings of academic incompetence, so often created through thoughtless forms of testing rather than thoughtful. Emotional harassment, teasing, cultural labels. I'm sure we've all encountered classes which split up into subgroups and cliques according to interest lines or gender or belief systems. And yesterday Susan Salvo's talk was very nice about using team approach to quickly override that. Resource restriction, if they are not eating well, sleeping well, or other basic needs not satisfied. If they're smoking, if they are just in general, not practicing good self-care. So the opposite. Opposite is creating an environment where there's physical comfort, intellectual respect, where there's encouragement, where there's challenge, but it's thoughtful challenge. I don't just diss the sympathetic nervous system. You've got to have some level of sympathetic stuff or you're going to fall asleep. Sometimes those of us who are melodious teachers will discover that the student will be listening and suddenly their head will drop to the desk. It's just like, you know, all those massages you do where you're looking at this vital interaction they're having, and after about 2 minutes of the massage, you know, I don't begrudge people the need for sleep, but sometimes you'll get a little more benefit if there's consciousness as well as unconsciousness present in their process. Kindness, celebrating similarities and differences, and with optimized resources. So in a way, we can just, you know, ask ourselves, how are we creating in our classroom this situation for the hippocampus to really be engaged? Obviously, the parasympathetic system being at least balanced with the sympathetic, or maybe a little bit more on the parasympathetic side. Encountered this quote a while ago, and I never knew where it was from, but it triggers me and it interests me. 60% of healing is environment. When I first, for many years when I was doing massage, I thought my hands and my body and my body-mind was what was creating the healing. And then we put up a few pictures and made our waiting room prettier, and suddenly we were getting like 30% better results. I'm like, oh my God. So pictures can do it? You know, obviously, we need to create an environment which is healing, that is a social environment in the classroom, plus the feng shui and so on of our schools, our classrooms, our therapy rooms. Because the environment we're in triggers our emotions, and emotions, as we can see, the amygdala, the hippocampus, all that's part of the emotional brain. It doesn't really touch the intellectual part until fairly slowly when things filter up to the cerebrum much less quickly. Emotions are the gatekeepers to learning. So the sensory system is somewhat more important than the cerebral system. And when we talk about the sensory system, the idea that there are 5 senses has long been abandoned, and I just want to remind us, I was looking at this list the other day. So we have the usual sight, taste, touch, pressure, itch. I like that itch gets its own little category. You know, it's very preoccupying when you're itchy. You know what I mean? Thermoception, say the sense of sound, of smell, of proprioception, and tension sensors, nociceptors, equilibrio, how do you pronounce it? Equilibrioception? Equilibrium, yeah, let's be simple. Equilibrioception. Stretch receptors, chemoreceptors, you know, taste and smell, and chemoreceptors in the bloodstream. Thirst, hunger, magnetoception. I always like that. We have evidently still, although it's obviously way more vestigial than in birds that use magnetoception for their guidance systems in flight, we still have some degree of magnetoception, and perhaps those grounding mats would work with that, I don't know. But it's interesting to note that that still is it is able to be proven evidently that we still have some degree of sensing of magnetic fields, and the sensation of time. And I like that they've included that too. So these are all ways in which we could look. How could I optimize any one of these categories within my classroom and within the way I work so that we create the environment that in which teaching can learning most likely take place? So teaching is a performance art. You know, we sometimes forget with session plans and lesson plans and what all, you walk in there, you still don't know what's going to happen. You know what I mean? You walk suddenly, the other day, you know, I was teaching and this woman broke down in tears in the middle of the class. I'm like, wait a minute, that isn't in my lesson plan. Person crying hysterically, shh, please, you're interrupting my, no, obviously. It's all improvised, and sessions are all improvised, and we kind of forget as we try to lovingly to put some order on reality, some coherence, that no matter what we do, you know, what is it John Lennon said, life happens when you've made other plans, you know. So it's based in understanding it both as a science. There obviously are wonderful pedagogical understandings about this, but also a fine and applied art. Just like massage is an art and a science, or applies art and science, so does teaching. Teaching and learning are sensory, motor, limbo, meaning the limbic system, and cerebral experiences. All of those are engaged. Susan said this the other day. The only source of knowledge is experience, said Einstein, who also had a sense of humor, as you know. This is part of our experience now. And then I encountered this quote that's really beautiful and somewhat surprising. You may have seen this somewhere before. Ida Rolf. Ida Rolf said, "Go around the problem." This is the problem of the person having trouble learning or having fixed opinions. Go around the problem, get the system sufficiently resilient so that it is able to change, and it will change. It doesn't have to be forced. It's the forcing that you have to avoid at all costs. Now, you know, the common conception of Rolfing was that if there was anything that was forcing in soft tissue manipulation, it was Rolfing. Well, note how she completely disavows herself from that idea, and I think that's fantastic. And also how she says, it is nature that will organize it. She often said, free the structural system and nature will organize it. Similarly, free your students to be who they are and their natural learning tendencies. Their nature will take care of learning. You know, all I have to do usually is tell a joke or play guitar a little bit. There's more flexibility in the mind. Then I say, amygdala. Amygdala. I'm like, what is amygdala? Well, let me tell you. You know, suddenly you've got an open channel for the amygdala to go into their mind. I love it. There she is. Rolf, definitely one of the patron saints of our whole bodywork world. This morning I found a new thing that I thought was very provocative, so I want to bring this up. You've probably seen this quote somewhere. I didn't know it was by this man. So, life is not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be experienced. Okay, very important. Beyond that, then here is a picture of Radhakrishnan, who was a great educator in India. And he says, I don't know if you can see this, he says, when we think we learn, we cease to know. So I'm pondering that. I'm going, now that's interesting. Because often when we think we learn, we think that we don't know anything already. You know, as a student, have you ever had that experience? I do. Every time I enter a classroom and I'm with somebody who knows a lot more than I do, I tell myself, I don't know anything. Oh my God. Here's Whitney Lowe going on and on about this and that. I don't know crap, you know, so. They're telling me about all the organizations. I don't know anything about this. I don't even know that abbreviation or what it stands for. So, yeah. When we, I'm against abbreviations. I want to outlaw, no, I'm not teasing. But this is provocative, I think, definitely. Isn't it a beautiful quote? It gives you some, like a koan almost. I just want to tell you one story, and then I think we'll take a break with that. Yeah. Years ago, when I was a music student in Chicago, I worked in a record store called Rose Records. At that time, they advertised themselves as the largest record store in the world. You know Rose Records, somebody? Yeah. All right. So here I am one day, young music student, trying to figure out things in the world. And this woman walks in, and it was a long, long store. So she was at the opposite end, but I heard her. She said, I'd like to get an album by John Coltrane. Well, I like Coltrane, jazz player. And so I yelled, I said, I'll help her, I'll help her. So I went running over to this woman, and it was a young black woman in a fur coat. She looked so beautiful, I could barely talk, you know. But I stammered, I said, so you want an album by John Coltrane? She said, yes. I said, what album you want? She said, you know. And I said, no, I don't know. He has a lot of albums. She said, you know. I said, well, no, there's like Ascension and Olé, and he's on Kind of Blue, and blah, blah, mentioned a bunch of albums. And she said, no, you know. And then she kind of stared a little deeper into me. And I said, oh, I don't know what you mean. She said, you know. And I said, I don't know, I'm looking around. I'm transfixed by this gorgeous furred person in front of me staring into my face. You know. She looked at me one more time. She said, you know. And I kind of looked around and went again. I went, okay, I know. And that remained as just a weird experience for me for many years. Until finally somebody asked me, this is much year later, he said, David, you know, you run a school and you play music and you write all this stuff and, you know, you have all this stuff going on, but what are you really about, you know, at your core? What's really there? And I thought, oh my God, guy Frank. I said, Frank has found me out. Deep in my core, there's nothing there at all. There's nothing. And suddenly the story of this woman, Penny, came forth, and I said, you know, Frank, years ago this woman said to me, you know. And I think maybe the reason that I teach is because I know something. You know, I don't know what it is. But as teachers, we know, or we wouldn't teach. You know, and you know what you know is deeper than words. It's that connection with touch. It's that connection with what you know is vital, what is meaningful. And so then I like to tell my students, of course, so let me tell you, you know. You know. On one level, you don't have to learn anything. And Plato said, all learning is merely recollection. You know, but it's the teacher's job to remind you, also to perhaps give you words for what you already know, but maybe don't have the language for. But in touch, we already know this stuff. You know what I mean?
I know.
You know?
Yes.
All right. Now say it out loud. I know. I know. All right.
So what album did you buy?
I don't remember. And all I can tell you, there was a follow-up to the story, but that can't be part of the story at this moment. Okay. Yeah. Then I really knew. Okay. It's not what you think. Okay, go ahead.
So I'm having a different experience of knowing.
Yeah.
Because sometimes knowing is a closed end. If we think we know,
Right.
we may not be receptive. I could read that quote two different ways.
Absolutely.
So when we're sure of something, we know something, in some ways it doesn't leave open for the learning. So, I don't know, that's a little different experience of I know.
Yeah.
That maybe in the learning, I'm not sure how to read that quote, but
Yeah.
the saying I'm learning means like I and myself don't know and I'm receptive to.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, let's say maybe he's wrong.
Well,
I mean,
a couple of ways, really.
yeah, absolutely. That's one reason why I find it intriguing. Because I'm like, well, yeah, maybe no, and I'm going to think more about that.
But ceasing to know, is that good or bad?
Yeah.
Because that knowing can sometimes be a stopping point instead of a movement.
Totally, totally. Who knows? Who knows? Yeah.
So this, a year or so ago, I went to a continuing education class on an approach to treating people with headaches. And before actually teaching the material, the instructor was sharing a number of anecdotes from their experience. And one of the stories that was shared is this: the instructor said how a young lady had been having headaches since she was very young, and like virtually every day, sometimes crippling migraines. And so this young lady came in, and she did a treatment with this young lady, and afterwards the migraine was gone. And the young lady, and she, according to the story, the young lady was sitting on the edge of the table with her legs hanging off, just kind of looking quiet. And then out of nowhere says, "When I was young, my father used to molest me." And the instructor went on to say, "I looked at her and said, and that's why you have migraines."
Oh.
And then related how she was surprised that this person then gathered up all her stuff and left without paying, never to be seen again. And so I was appalled.
Yeah.
And I had to ask, I had to ask the question, like, how did you know? I mean, maybe, but how did you actually know this?
Right.
And this person said, "I just knew." And so then I had to ask, when you think about that, do you ever wish that you had maybe said something different or handled it differently? No. In the moment. And so I'm still appalled. I actually use this as a perfect example of what not to do. Of nocebo in action. Because for whether there's a connection or not, for the rest of her life, every time this young lady has a headache, what's she going to think about? Do we really need to double underline it? So maybe we know something. Maybe we have a knowing. We should also know when to shut up.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. So it's important to empower both pieces of that. Absolutely. I'm just emphasizing that we do know something deep inside, but from what you're saying, I want to just piggyback on that. You know, in many states, we are not allowed to diagnose, as you may know. And I emphasize to the students, you're not allowed to diagnose physical stuff, but remember, you're not allowed to diagnose energy or psychology either. So when you tell somebody, if God forbid, you know, they've got that second chakra problem or that's an attribution. Any attribution, even if it's positive, can have negative consequences, can become a nocebo. So you're absolutely right. We need to temper knowledge with humility, because what we don't know is a lot more vast than what we do know. Yeah.
There's a Tao Te Ching quote that says, "Those who know do not speak. Those who speak do not know."
Yeah. How could he have known so many right-on things? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to just add the word wisdom in there.
Yeah. Wisdom?
Yeah, in the knowing. There's, you know, it's kind of a common sense being wise of knowing when not to blurt out.
Yeah. So just think of the etymology. Wise, dumb. You got to be wisdom. I've got a lot of wisdom here if you want to access it, me as a teacher. Yeah. Yeah.
If I could, what this means to me is that it's not all about data.
Yeah.
When we think, we data process. And then we stop learning from the experiential point of view. So we stop feeling.
Exactly.
So because there's too much going in one side and the other side sort of just stops. We haven't learned to connect them both.
Yeah.
So that to me is just if you start thinking about the data, you start thinking about what it is, then you cease to really embody the knowledge.
Yeah, yeah. So let's kind of play with those understandings, realizing the richness, the knowledge that we have about learning and the mystery that learning, you know, still is. What I'd like to do is to really explore these things one by one as we move into the next part of the presentation. Could we take, how long a break do you need? 10 minutes. Let's take 10 minutes, please. Yeah.
There's going to be like a coffee break at 10:30.
Is there?
Put everything out.
Oh, there is?
I think,
well, then I can...
It's not on our schedule today, but
That's the
there's a
rumor
setup.
that I heard.
Rumor, okay. Well, then let me... Okay. We can... Is he going to double check? No coffee yet. All right. Well, then we could go till 10:30 and take our break then, see if the coffee's there. If not, we can run around the block or do things to stimulate our sympathetic nervous systems, you know, run up, yeah. Question, comment? And obviously you need to go to the bathroom anytime, come back, but I've got lots more wonderful things to do, mostly do together. Yeah.
Well, and when we reverse that quote, when we think we know, we see
What do you think?
well, we have our little nervous system inclined here.
I like it.
Like you go somewhere to learn something, and you're like, oh, well, I already know this. So you
Yeah.
shut yourself
Yeah.
down.
How many people have you, if you're continuing education people, you're out there teaching a workshop, and 1 or 2 people right away come up, oh, you know, I read your handout, I read your article, and you know, I do all that already. I don't know, I just knew it somehow. Dermoneuromodulation, oh yeah, I got that down already. I've never taken a class. It's charming. Yeah. Yeah. Kate?
Yeah, just a quick comment, sort of a joke, but I really mean this. I don't know what all the letters stand for either, you know, in all these organizations, and it's kind of stressful, so I'd like to just request that nobody make any more organizations. Enough, okay?
Right.
No more
Right. We've made all the organizations, now let's let nature organize them.
what they all mean.
Cool. All right, so let me talk about the next phase of what we're going to do together. And we're going to explore teaching. As we've said, teaching and learning and studying, it's all an experience. And when it comes to the nonverbal humanities, a great deal of what's critical here is what's going on beneath your cerebrum. Your cerebrum is where so much of the learning is focused these days. How can you get it into their head? How can you get them to memorize it? How can you get it to be regurgitated? But when it comes to body work, particularly actually doing body work, you do it with your whole body. You do it with your whole self, your emotions, every piece and level of your body. And the same holds true for teaching. I taught a seminar once called Teaching with Your Legs, where we did nothing but walk around and make some gestures. And you can use nonsense syllables with that. Blah, 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 blah. It's like flamenco teaching. Can you see it? So we need all of us to be good teachers. And I've rarely encountered a training that dealt with anything other than left brain lesson planning, perhaps some degree of creativity in there too. But there's so much more to it than that. So we're going to be exploring these aspects of ourselves in small groups of 3s. So I'm going to have you all gather. Let's make a shift now. If you're not at a table of 3, go ahead, come forward or back. And you want to have 3 people at a table.